Hi, I'm Nigel Lloyd and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Hertfordshire. We're conducting the Leeds Drug and Alcohol Services evaluation. First of all, I'd like to thank you so much for volunteering to take part in the evaluation and for volunteering to complete this timeline task. This is just a very short video introduction that will take you through some of the steps in completing the timeline. So what we're interested in with this timeline is finding out more about how the drug and alcohol services in Leeds changed. We're particularly interested in you putting down on the timeline events that you feel are relevant to those changes and your experiences of those changes. So these might be changes in what your organisation does, or changes to your individual role or the way that you work. They could be more specific things like, for instance, starting to work at home or getting a new laptop or a new desk or a new workstation. There could be changes in the way that you work with different teams. Completely up to you. Any number of different things. And we're really interested in finding out about the whole range of events and changes and experiences that you've had. So this is the timeline. What you can see in front of you right here is the actual timeline. It will display differently depending on what device you're viewing it on. So if you're viewing it on a desktop computer or laptop, it'll look different to if you're viewing it on a tablet or a phone. So what you're viewing here is the way that the timeline is displayed on a laptop. And at the top left here, you can see there are some instructions for completing the timeline. So please read those before you actually start completing the timeline. And you can move around the timeline as well, depending on your device and depending on what you're using to move around, by following those instructions that are there in red. And what you can see here is the actual timeline. You'll see that there are some circles here that denote different months in time. You'll see there are a few prompts, just things to remind you about some of the things that have happened over the last year or so. So there's some prompts there at the top, but the bottom of the timeline is where we'd like you to add your details, your events, your experiences. So to add an event, it's very straightforward. You just go over to this toolbar here on the left side of the screen and click on what looks here like a post-it note. If you put the cursor over it or the mouse over it, it'll say sticky notes. You select one of those. You can either choose a colour if you like, or you can just click on it and then drag it under the timeline. And once it's under the timeline, click in it and then just start typing. And don't worry about the size of the post-it note or the sticky note, because it'll expand depending on the amount of text that you put in it. And you can also, if you like, actually click on the edges of it and drag it out a little bit to make it bigger if you want to do that. It's completely up to you. Then once you've typed in that post-it note, click the small blue arrow to the right of the sticky note and drag this to where you want to place it on the timeline. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, I've typed in this one, started working from home full time. Okay, but obviously you could type in there whatever you want. And then simply go back, pick another post-it note, drag it across, click on the arrow and join it to the timeline. Put as many different post-it notes as you like at the bottom of that timeline, and we'd really encourage you to do that. If you decide that you'd like to move a post-it note, you can click and drag it and move it along. You can also click on the point at which the arrow joins the timeline, and that'll allow you to then drag that event forward or backwards in time, as it were. So as you see, I can drag this from where it is in the middle of June and July earlier on if I like to do that. And that's pretty much it. Just select a post-it note, drag it under the timeline, select the arrow and place the arrow somewhere on that timeline. And obviously you can move it around as much as you want. So you can come back to the timeline as often as you like until the deadline, and you can add new post-it notes, new events, new experiences onto that timeline, and you can move them along as you see fit. And when you've finished, you don't need to do anything, because we'll check at the end of the deadline and then download your completed timeline. And that's it. So thank you so much again. At the bottom of the instructions, there's some contact information. And you can use that contact information to contact us if you've got any questions or queries or require any help or assistance with doing the timeline. Thanks.